Morning. Good morning. I'm relaxed here outside. I hope the sound is not too difficult. And I'm going to give over this morning to the day. It's 9/11, I see. And every year on 9/11, I bring up a certain story that moves me in particular. We might give over a little Isaiah, but it's not much more this morning. This story it's a tale. It's a heavy story, and there's a passage in the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin 97b. I quote it often because it preserves an argument between Rav and Shmuel, who were two heads of yeshivas in Babylonia. And they argued about a lot of things. They were like Hillel and Shammai of their time. They were both heads of academies and respected each other. But they had different opinions on things. In the Talmud's significant space on 97b, it brings up the subject of when will the Messiah come? And then it brings up the subject of the 36, taken from a verse, I think in Isaiah actually. We're waiting for 36. And then there's an argument. How many are we waiting for? For the redemption. Some say 1,000. Some say 36. Some say 2. It's a very interesting part of the Talmud. I cite it often, especially this time of year. But it's also significant because, for me, every event of significance, there's a certain number of stories, a finite number of stories that, for me personally, I bring down and I offer up. On this day, this is the story that has been that for me over the years since I first heard it. I heard it on the radio, and I was so taken by it that I listened again at night because they played the same radio program in the evening as they did in the morning. And I transcribed it myself, so all mistakes are mine. This is the story for me that I bring down and I offer up on this day. Remembering 9/11, 36 stories, citing Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 97b, 1102. In every generation, there are a finite number of stories that authenticate, define the generation. In every event of significance, every catastrophe, every jubilation, there are a certain number of stories, 36, 31, 1,036, that illumine, limbs, Limns, the catastrophe. The defining story for me of 9/11 is the story of the firefighters of New York City, and a particular account of those firefighters given by a board member of the Fallen Firefighters Foundation, Vina Drennan. Her husband, Captain John Drennan, was killed on the job in 1994. She was interviewed by Noah Adams on All Things Considered, National Public Radio. This is what I heard listening to it on the radio. Pardon mistakes, I transcribed it myself. Mrs. Drennan, we went down to the firehouse, which is below 14th Street. I went to the wake of one of the firefighters. They have a sense of optimism. They had decided to pray to my husband, who they feel still watches over them. And they said, Captain Drennan, Show us where the 11 missing members are. And one young one said, I knew just where to put my shovel. Ladder 5 is so comforted that they were able to find 5 of their own and return their bodies to their families and honor their deaths in a proper and magnificent funeral, all things considered. Mrs. Drennan, are you saying that those on the scene believed that the spirit of your late husband helped them to find those who were fallen? Mrs. Drennan, yes. You lose your religion after a large crisis, but you sure get a spirituality about it, all things considered. There's a photograph of something you don't often see in the magazines in the recent U.S. News and World Report of firemen carrying a dead man. The Reverend Michael Judge, Fire Department chaplain. You know him, 68 years old, Mrs. Drennan. He was one of my best friends, all things considered. As you know, he was administering last rites and was killed by falling debris. Then she told the story of Michael Judge and how he had comforted her after the death of her husband in 1994, and how he had remembered her on her anniversary every year thereafter. Mrs. Drennan, when he prayed, it was the most blessed thing. You felt that his prayers were a direct hotline to God, all things considered. He was a Franciscan priest, Mrs. Drennan. Michael was administering last rites to a firefighter that had just been hit by a body of a woman. People were falling out of those towers so they wouldn't burn. In the midst of this, here he is kneeling and giving last rites. The firefighters, when they realized he had perished, they carried him up to St. Peter's Church and they laid out his body on the altar and they put his rosaries in his hand and they pinned on his fire department badge and they prayed over him. Later that night, they wouldn't let his body go to the morgue. They brought him to their firehouse and they laid him in the back room. And the friars across the street of St. Francis of Assisi came and they lit candles and said a vigil. He was beloved by every firefighter in the city, and the fire department will grieve many, many years for the loss of his beautiful life. There are a number of stories that illumine an event, limbs like a manuscript, 36, 32, 1,000. And one of those stories, may be the one that we draw down every year and offer up. This is the story that I draw down on 9/11. I'm going to leave you with that story. Thanks for joining us. My sacred partner was on a mission of mercy. She'll be back tomorrow. We'll be here again. We'll continue on with our intentioning. We're into the squeeze before a significant election, moving toward the days of awe. In the 7 weeks of consolation, remember the ratio: 3 weeks of deep sadness in the summer, then 7 weeks of consolation. That ratio, 3, 7. emerging into the days of awe, merging into the days of awe, and the lift and ascent that trip takes us on. Thanks for being here. I appreciate it.